Hi, I'm Maddy,
And I'm Ryan.
and this is a PowerPoint presentation about WIDA, which is an Access for ELL's assessment in listening, reading, writing, and speaking.
Okay, we're going to walk you through it. So the structure of the assessment is divided by grade level clusters that include pre-K, 1, 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12.
The English language learners are placed into 3 separate tiers that overlap based on the WIDA Access Placement Test.
So the students take the WIDA Access Placement Test before this test. They get their placement and then they're put in the tiers, and the different tiers determine what level of questions they get. And the tiers are overlapped with the question difficulty, and that helps to give them like a common proficiency scale across the exam.
And across that scale, it begins with entering and then beginning, developing, expanding, and bridging.
And the test isn't norm referenced to non-ELLs, it's only for ELLs, and it's norm referenced because they compare all the ELLs that take the test against each other.
Within each cluster, it is divided into listening, speaking, reading, and writing assessments.
And then it's timed, but it's flexible, and they're willing to allow students more time if they need it and things like that.
And here is a picture of the tiers and how they align with the entering through bridging. And actually there's reaching.
Which is like full proficiency, they say. And the different bar tiers show you the span of questions. So if somebody's put in tier A, it means they're like a low proficiency. So the types of questions they have range from entering to developing. Whereas if somebody's in tier C, they're determined to be the most proficient, and their questions, the easiest they have, go from developing and all the way up to bridging and reaching. This is a chart that shows you what is expected at each level. So you have entering all the way to bridging, and then you have each standard, which goes from listening, speaking, reading, writing, and it shows you the type of information they do across. So for example, if you're doing a listening test, an entering proficiency will do skills like identify, where a bridging will do things like determine relationships between states of matter from oral discourse. So simple to complex. And then if you're doing something down in the writing at the bottom, they would copy names for entering proficiency, but they would evaluate potential usefulness of astronomical objects for the bridging. So it moves from very simple to very complex.
And the goals are very much aligned with Bloom's taxonomy. So what is WIDA? It stands for World Class Instructional Design and Assessment. And it is a teacher-conducted assessment containing listening, speaking, writing, and reading portions.
And the test is pretty much given to students once a year in kindergarten through 12th grade. The same assessment for all of them, just different questions at each grade level or each cluster. And then it's for students who have been identified as ELLs. So they use the results of these tests to check the progress the student makes in acquiring English for the academic environment throughout the year. And then it helps come up with a plan of support for continuing language development as the year goes on.
So the types of assessment, there are themed folders to adjust the standards within each of the content areas.
And then each folder contains questions that range across the proficiency levels, which is supposed to help support the delivery of test results that are comparable across all grades and tiers.
The primary types of assessments are multiple choice and written essays.
So these next couple slides are just breakdowns of the grade clusters and each different skill: reading, listening, speaking, writing. So it gives you examples of the formatting. For example, in the reading section for a 1 and 2 cluster, it tells you that the students would view a picture, answer multiple choice questions about the picture, and then they would just have short, simple questions with single word answers. Whereas if you get into the listening section with 9 through 12th grade, they would do something similar to like the 3rd through 8 grouping, but then they would also have some space to add notes and things like that. So again, from simple to complex as the kids age.
And here are some examples of the formatting for the speaking. In clusters 3 through 5, the teacher or the test administrator reads a prompt. The student has an option to choral read with the teacher. The teacher asks questions about the prompt read. So for example, they might point at a number and say, "What number is this?" Or if they're looking at a graph, they ask the student to explain what the graph is showing you. In clusters 6 through 8, it's very similar to 3 through 5, but prompts are longer and more complex. And in 9 through 12, the teacher reads a prompt with some sort of visual, a graph, or a table. They ask questions regarding the prompt and visual. For example, the teacher might say, "Explain how the Earth's tilt affects the seasons." And in writing, for the clusters 6 through 8, there are open-ended prompts to write about. So the student can write an essay, and one example given is, if your school received $10,000, what would you spend it on?
So this is an example of the formatting for the questions. So this is a speaking question for grades 3 through 5. It has the standard, like using the language of science, the language of math, the language of language arts, etc. Proficiency level ranging from 1 to 5, like we talked about earlier. The model performance indicator, which is pretty much just the standard that question is assessing. It gives instructions for the administrator, gives you the data, and then you go through the prompts and ask the student things like, what's this? What body part is this? What number is this? What does this math symbol mean? And it just gives you the prompts. And this is supposed to be a separate page that's blown up so that you just show it to the child and then ask them the prompts.
And this is a writing example. As I mentioned earlier, it says a local charity donated $10,000 to your school. The principal has asked the students for ideas on how to spend the money. These are the most popular ideas. So then the student has the opportunity to read about some of the ideas, and then they choose how they would use the money, and they write about it in an essay.
Practicality, we gave it a 4 because it can be administered to a lot of students at once. The grading is subjective in certain areas like speaking and writing, so it does take some time. So far from perfect, but pretty good because you can give it to a lot of kids at once.
Mm-hmm. In terms of reliability, that of course depends on the test administrator, the consistency of the environment, how the student is feeling, their attitude that day during the assessment. The length of the assessment may hinder the student's motivation to put in full effort. That is, if a student is just reaching their frustration level and they're unable to focus as well. So on a scale of 1 to 5, we gave it a 3.
For validity, we said the questions do measure what it's supposed to measure because each question is tied to a specific objective, so very high validity. And we would give it a 4 just because we're hesitant to give a 5 because that means it's perfect, and we don't know if it would necessarily be perfect, but it's good.
In terms of authenticity, we gave it a 3. It does provide beneficial practice for future assessments and standardized testing all up until 12th grade and possibly past that. It does have non-real world tasks, but it is very relevant to educational experiences.
For the washback, since the student gets no feedback about their answers or about the test, we scored it very low. And we don't think that taking this test would change anything about the person after they've taken it, so we give it a 1.
There are biases in the WIDA test. Based on the multitude of students' cultures and backgrounds, the content within the assessment may be confusing or misunderstood.
There are various words and phrases that the students might not have encountered before, or they might have a different name for in their native language. Things like wind vane, aspirin, instruments being viewed as a musical instrument or a tool to conduct something.
It also could be confusing for students if they're unfamiliar with the format of the test.
Advantages of this test are that it's easy to conduct, it gives you an accurate understanding of the child's vocabulary range in English, and there's a wide spectrum of questions which helps you understand a variety of language skills.
Some disadvantages include there is subjective grading of the speaking and writing portions. It's non-authentic. There's very little washback, and it could be the first experience for the student with a large-scale testing, so they may not perform to their best ability because of that. And that's our presentation. So thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for being with us.